Hello, everyone. First of all, it's a great pleasure to welcome Rajesh to this episode. Uh, Rajesh, as Pragesh mentioned, has been a co-founder of MakeMyTrip. And MakeMyTrip, what many people do not know, was set up as far back as 2000. And MakeMyTrip has been an early mover in the digital travel space and has leveraged technology to its benefit. And today it is one of the largest, of course, in the country, it is the largest OTA and one of the largest companies in the world, the OTAs in the world. So it's really a pleasure to have Rajesh on the platform and on the show. As we move to recovery and as we move to the post-pandemic world, we want to learn some of the secrets of digitization in travel, and we are all looking forward to the insights that Rajesh will share with us. So, with that, I will hand over to my colleague Tara to take the session forward. And once again, thank you, Rajesh, for joining us, and welcome to this format. Thank you.
So, hello everybody. I'm Tara Naidu, Chief of Commercial of Air India Express. Welcome, Rajesh, once again to our Express Engage program. MakeMyTrip, as we all know, is an iconic brand, and so is Air India Express, having recently won the Iconic Brand Award this year. So, we would like to learn something from you today about how MakeMyTrip has survived, what is your future plans, etc. So basically, to begin with, perhaps we could talk first about the survival strategy of MakeMyTrip during the pandemic, especially.
Yeah, sure. And thank you, Tara, and thank you, Alok, for those kind words as well. It's my pleasure to be here with sharing our own learnings with you all. As well as the overall audience that is there listening to us. So let me address that your first question, Tara. Yes, I guess we are all very well aware of the kind of unprecedented crisis that the whole industry is going through for a last good about year and a half or more. And yes, from our point of view, as Alok mentioned, yes, maybe many people may not know that we started our operations way back in 2000. So over 2 decades, although first 5 years was pretty humble beginning, as nothing was happening in the digital world in India back then, it's fairly evolved, as we will talk about it now. But been there for over 2 decades, we had our share of seeing disruption in the marketplace, many small disruptions. In fact, 2001, as you would all know, was a big, massive disruption in the form of 9/11 as well, and then there was SARS pandemic, etc. So we had our share of sort of navigating some of those disruptions through, but this one was probably a mother of all, right? I mean, the intensity, the size, the magnitude of this problem, this disaster was of a different order. And therefore, whatever little learnings that we had in the past was not necessarily enough. So we had to sort of get back to the drawing board and learn more. But in terms of just the survival strategy, we all know country got locked down, last year, end of March, and disaster hit us. The result of that was that the revenue fell off the cliff, right? I mean, there was hardly any booking. I mean, our first quarter, right after the country lockdown, was revenue drop of 95%. So we were down to 5%, literally. Now, I have to admit that no business, and we were not any different, were prepared for this kind of a thing, right? I mean, all of a sudden your 200 million quarter revenue goes down by 95%. What playbook would you sort of immediately fall back on? So there was hardly any playbook at that point in time. So what did you need to do was, at least from our point of view, we very quickly sort of gathered ourselves, without being, panicking about it. And that was probably the learning that we had learned from the past, that, I don't think immediately panicking or overreacting was going to achieve anything. What we needed to do was to just very quickly get back to the drawing board and start working on the cost here. Because when the revenue falls completely off the cliff out of nowhere, all what you need to do is to very, very severely, very, very aggressively attack your cost and bring that cost under control. And a lot of our cost was variable cost, which was easy to bring under control, which was effectively cost of customer acquisition in the form of, various sales promotion, marketing activities, etc. that happens. So that was brought under control immediately, like literally bringing down to nothing. The hardest part was to, how do we sort of optimize the fixed cost? And I guess, few of us sort of got together and we said, okay, for a few months, for quarter, just from a survival or an existential crisis standpoint, all what you need to do is to, at least for the short term, and I'll talk about the long-term strategy as well, but for the short term, you had to attack and you had to optimize, and there was no other sort of strategy that was going to work. So we looked at pretty much every cost item of any nature. The hardest one to look at the people cost, and we had our share of some sort of right sizing that we had to do. We just couldn't avoid it, and that was probably the most difficult decision for us. But luckily, it wasn't in terms of size, wasn't that big, and also it was not very far away from our pre-pandemic strategy as well, where we were looking to sort of change the construct of our retail outfits from a fixed cost model to a variable cost model. So we turned them into a franchise model, and because of which we had to right size some sort of workforce which was operating out of our retail offices as well. And given that we were tech-led company, the decision strategically was the right thing to do and wasn't really that hard. But from a people perspective, it's probably the hardest decision that we had to go through, where we would have definitely lost our sleep on. But we had to do it because it was the right thing to do for the business. And on that part, then we had to focus more on the, how can we possibly soften the blow for people, etc. So we were very focused on the how part there, having taken that hard call, and then practically looked at every sort of cost line item there. And there also, when it came to people, it was important for us, given the culture and the DNA of the company, the way we had sort of built it over the years, that we had to lead it by example. So we effectively led it by setting the example from the top, taking pay cuts substantially, by both Deep and me, going to zero. The senior management followed suit, and I think that sort of set the stage for other people to sort of volunteering themselves to take pay cuts for time being. So I guess it was just effectively a very aggressive cost management that we had to do, and that continued for a quarter to two. And then as the business was reviving, in all fairness, we were looking for always first opportunity for us to be able to just go back and then make good all those sacrifices that people had made as well, which we ended up doing in the form of restoration of salary, etc., as the business was reviving. But from a survival standpoint, at that point in time, it was only one mantra that we had to just optimize our cost, and that's what we ended up doing. And on the other side, the resources that we had in terms of cash on the balance sheet, we had a decent amount of money at that point in time. But for the first opportunity we got, we ended up raising more, just to make sure that we would be prepared for a little long haul, because this pandemic was not necessarily going to be for a quarter or two, as we've already seen that it has gone for many months, and I'm not sure we are also completely out of the woods yet. So this is essentially, Tara, we ended up sort of.
Okay. Rajesh, some of them can't hear you, so I will request you to speak a little louder or increase the volume.
All right. Tara, is it better for you? Just keep telling me.
Yeah.
All right.
It's better.
Okay.
Okay. So the travel and hospitality industry, as we all know, was one of the worst affected in the pandemic.
Yeah.
And but surprisingly, it has been resilient. The number of companies that closed down because of this pandemic is not as much as it has been in some of the other parts of the world. We know of big airlines who have actually closed shop. So that didn't happen in India. So, and of course, maybe it's affected some of the smaller companies to a much larger extent. But from a Make My Trip standpoint, is there something that you did with your partners to help them survive the pandemic or get back on their feet? What are the measures, if any, that Make My Trip undertook?
Yeah, sure. No, I think your comment is valid. Your observation is valid, and I would give a lot of credit to the entrepreneurs in the industry, and their ability to show resilience. And we've seen that in the past as well when there were many crises. I mean, the industry has been going through many crises in the past. And sometimes those crises could be of macro nature, and sometimes it could be industry specific crisis, like an airline shutting down and so on. So and yes, the sector continues to show resilience overall. But from our point of view, look, our biggest strength that we have is of distribution. Our biggest strength is is that of reach and reaching out to the consumers. So I guess our biggest support continues to be, as whatever, wherever we were seeing the green shoots, we were just working very closely with the partners across the board, whether they were airlines or the hotel partners or any of our other product services, to make sure that every single opportunity of bringing the business back, we would help them, with both hands. I mean, yeah, and there are many partners that actually we work very, very closely to see that, here is where we are ready to invest behind, and here is where we are seeing the green shoots. And can you come together and let's just try and get the business back? Because more you get the bookings back, better it would be. Because at the end of the day, the revival will start from there. While every business house, every entity would, work on their figuring out their own resources, the cost cutting and the optimization part of it. Can we just also work together to continue to keep seeing opportunities of where the revival could also come in? Now, whether they were an air bubble arrangements or there was, let's say, one odd destination that will open up. In the case of Maldives, we would start filling up the rooms and the flights, or if it was an essential travel that would continue, then what is that we can continue to keep doing? So that was on one side, and I think that is our sort of biggest strength and bigger contribution to our partners. And I think the other couple of things during the pandemic was also, we were in the forefront of, representing industry with all the data. And, the good news is that we do have, a lot of the data that we can actually put it together. And I personally had many interactions with the tourism ministry to make sure that we represent the industry with all the efforts and the data to seek for help and to work towards to figure out how could they possibly provide support to the industry. So we were definitely on the forefront on pretty much every forum, working with various industry forums and reaching out to the various ministries, and then also, I guess, working backwards with the partners to see, if during the pandemic we had also sort of announced some cashback, some rationalization on cost of distribution for some of our hotel partners, if you will, and anybody, also some of them who needed working capital support. So whatever we could possibly, to be honest, bring it to the table, we've been very forthcoming in doing it with the partners and trying to see that we together navigate this storm, rather than everyone sort of fighting on its own. So And that has been our DNA as well. Pretty much getting together during the crisis, especially. I mean, when the going is good, everybody sort of ends up doing it. But during the crisis is when it makes a lot of difference if you come together and extend support. So we've been trying to do whatever little from our standpoint that we could bring to the table. We've been very forthcoming doing that.
Yeah, thanks, Rajesh. So we've seen the first wave affected us very, very badly because nobody was prepared for it. It was like unprecedented, like you said. And of course, each one took action as they seemed fit. As an airline, of course, we reacted differently. As a prime or one of the biggest OTAs in India, you probably had your own reactions. Then the second wave hit us. And we didn't realize that the second wave would hit India worse than the first in some ways, may not be for travel. But in terms of your response, have you experienced a difference in your reactions to the two waves? Did you experience any revenge travel in between the waves or after the second wave towards? I mean, the second wave is still on as such. But what has been your experience?
Yeah, sure. Happy to share that. I mean, the biggest difference, Tara, before I go to the business of pent-up demand and all, and that was pretty exciting as well, and I'll share more color on that. But the biggest difference between wave one and wave two was actually people got impacted quite heavily, and that was very disturbing. To be honest, at one point in time, about 450 of our employee colleagues were impacted directly. And if you include their parents and immediate family members, then there were some about 1,050. Who were infected, and some of them were really serious, and there was a lot of support and help that was needed by them, and there was crisis. In fact, we did very shockingly end up losing a couple of young spouses of senior colleagues as well. And that was the most disturbing part. And if you ask me, if there was one thing that we sort of more than 100% focused on for about 6 weeks relentlessly, was to extend support of all kinds of, whatever one, we could do, whether it was, a help desk to provide all sorts of support, whether it was a question of bringing in oxygen concentrators, and extending and making them available to people, importing them and making them available to people, or it was any sort of medical help support that they needed. They would, there was situation, as we all know, where the beds were not available, where the timely medication was not available. So we went through that phase, and then to me, that was the most disturbing and perhaps the lowest point in this pandemic. If I really try and compare between wave one and wave two, the severity was of different nature. It came much closer to home to all of us and colleagues, and that was really disturbing because people got very insecure after that. At the end of the day, the organizations are made of people, so the focus suddenly shifted from business was disrupted in any case, right? So and whatever was what we were doing on to sort of hold on to whatever business that was there, that was happening in any case. But in parallel, this was the biggest one that took a lot of our attention and bandwidth on. So that was one biggest difference. I thought it's worth calling out. And then on the business side, I think the relatively speaking, the better news was that while wave one was complete country lockdown, wave two, as we know, the restrictions were more localized. Restriction was not necessarily countrywide, which meant that there was some essential business that continued. So it wasn't really just from booking standpoint or revenue standpoint as bad or as disastrous as the first wave, April, May, June quarter was. And there was a little bit of a relief. And then therefore, from a strategy standpoint, frankly, it was easier for us to fall back on the hard work on establishing the playbook that we had done for wave one, to simply fall back on that and follow that. And we didn't do anything new because we had already done a lot on sort of establishing the playbook, including what we needed to do to reach out to the customers. Because as we all know, if there was one area where there was, despite all the efforts from all the partners and us together, we were not able to make every customer happy, because they did go through a lot of pain. They did go through a lot of issues in terms of, their cancellation and the refund spending and so on and so forth. And some part of that is still continuing. And we were sort of trying to do whatever best that we can together, working with the partners, etc., can go back and do it. But we had that playbook ready, and all that work that had happened during the first wave of the pandemic. Wave two was, from that point of view, it was easier. Um, I mentioned early on that that I will talk about the long term. See, while a lot of people and a lot of companies end up focusing, and rightly so, short term, because it was a question of survival. But I think it was important for us, and that has worked out well. As we had navigated some of these crises even in the past, that one should never lose sight of the long term. And our view for long term travel never changed. We continue to stay optimistic and bullish about travel post pandemic when it comes back. And therefore, from that point of view, we actually started working and kept our sort of workforce busy with further working on the platforms that could help. And some of those projects that we may not get chance to sort of attack and complete because of the business as usual. There's so much of day-to-day stuff happens when your business is as usual, because there's so much of growth that continues, so it keeps you busy. But this was the time when there was lull on the business side, and it was time for us to focus on to attack many projects. In fact, we ended up developing lot of the new platforms that are going to help us from long-term bet standpoint. Just to give you a couple of examples, we built a B2B platform for our travel agents partners, and we already have about 13,000 platforms. We actually also ended up launching in GCC countries right in the middle of pandemic. I mean, a lot of people were raising eyebrows and saying, middle of the pandemic, how can MakeMyTrip launch in the new geography? And we thought it was the right time to do, because we were ready from a product standpoint, and it will probably test the product in the market just from a platform experience standpoint. We also built a third-party advertisement platform. We also built a small fintech platform called Trip Money, and we already had a corporate platform called MyBiz and Quest to Travel. So there are a bunch of technology projects we ended up focusing on, investing on, and that helped people stay occupied, because otherwise people were getting pretty insecure, also not feeling safe and not feeling good. So keeping people busy also sort of uh, all this while.
Definitely, yes. I mean, I think you did what the government is pushing, Digital India, and you did a lot of digitization during the pandemic, which I think is wonderful. Uh, any comments about pent-up demand and revenge travel? How do you foresee the future?
Yeah, no, that's a good one. And actually we ended up seeing pent up demand, or call it revenge travel, like revenge shopping, revenge buying, etc., both after the wave one, when the restrictions got lifted, and even in the wave two. Although my hope and wish was, after the wave two and looking at the severity of the wave two that impacted people, that people would go out there and they had to, and they have to experience, because everybody was fatigued. But maybe there would be a lot more discipline, and people would follow safety protocols, because people would have felt maybe more fearful coming out of the wave two alone. And unfortunately, we don't see too much of that behavior, and maybe all of us need to be a little bit more disciplined about it, because I worry about uh, all this while there has been a roller coaster ride for us. So whenever that opens up, it shuts. So if it start and stop, and start and job, not necessarily going to do a work of good to the industry, because it actually causes a different sort of disruption. So, instead, if we have a situation where a gradual ramp up is happening but consistently, that would be far, far better and helpful for the industry revival. So, with that, that was the hope. But, guess what? It's not only in India. I can see this happening even in the other countries as well. Where all the sporting events have opened up, and after the game or two, the celebrations are all out there on the road and all. But we definitely saw, from a consumer behavior standpoint, a lot of pent up demand, which tells you, which is my personal belief as well, and I've seen it, happening over the last sort of 2 decades, is that the public memory is extremely, extremely short. I mean, people just absolutely forget about it. I mean, very soon, I mean, before you realize, and then they get on with the life. And I think the leisure segment, that's exactly what will happen. And maybe will be more and more. And when international opens up, I'm sure there is going to be some serious pent up demand there as well. Maldives opens up, and we see, immediately, sort of bookings start to pick up. And we saw that even post wave one as well. So I think that is likely to be the consumer behavior. I think one travel segment that will probably take more longer to come, besides, of course, international, when borders open up and all, is going to be business travel, and that too for large corporates. I think the large multinational companies will continue to have some sort of travel advisory, and they would be probably more careful for their people to open up that advisory for their people. But as far as small, medium enterprises, entrepreneurial outfits are concerned, they would be out there to do the business. And some of the industries like pharma and the FMCG, and people have to just go to meet their customers, etc. I think all of that will start. But I am really, obviously, like everyone else, I'm sure, is hoping that that third wave, I think if you look at the experts, look at the other countries' trends, although I would wish that it should not happen, but I can't see this not happening. I think it'll come. But my sort of wish and prayer is that it should not be, as severe as the wave two was, and maybe even moderate than wave one. And that will probably happen as the vaccinations pick up. So, so vaccination is going to be the key.
Thanks, Rajesh. We are open for questions. I would request all the attendees, if you can send in the questions. I have quite a few already, and I will go over them. So there's a question from Chirag Trivedi. Do you think vaccination passport will be effective in the future?
Yes, I do think so, actually. I mean, I was just ironically talking to another sort of journalist, and she was asking me the same question. And she is doing some international travel story. And I was saying, if there is, especially in the context of opening up international travel, I think if there is a common denominator that the industry can ride on, is going to be the vaccination, and therefore, if we can make the rules consistent for international travel for people who've got vaccinated, both the doses or one dose, depending upon which vaccination are you using, it could be a great start. And when you open this up, I don't think we need then the quarantine restrictions and so on. So, because everyone, including WHO, is recommending that the vaccination is going to, no guarantee for no infection per se, but it is not going to be severe. So, if that's the case, and, vaccination passport along with following protocols, which is, masks and social distancing and stuff, for whatever it's worth, all the airlines, in fact, as well as airports, even the hotel partners, actually have done a pretty good job of following the protocols. I think it's just the onus lies in more on individuals now, to be a little bit more careful and more disciplined. And then if we have because we've all, as industry, have done a reasonably good job of, following those protocols to make sure that we end up sort of offering safe and healthy products to the consumers. But if they sort of show some more discipline, and if we have the vaccination passport rules consistent for the countries, I think it's a good opportunity for the international travel to open up.
Okay, Rajesh. We have a question from Mr. Jasil Bulat. He says, sir, being CEO of college, what will be the future of the upcoming students in the aviation industry?
Yeah, no, it's an interesting question, and I can see where you would be concerned about. So again, I'll go back to short term and a long term view. I think short term, yes, there is an issue. The whole industry, not necessarily aviation, but even the hospitality industry, even the intermediaries, partners like us, etc. Everybody is impacted, and I'm not sure there's going to be too much of a hiring that would be taking place right now. But guess what? I mean, I can tell you with a lot of confidence, just 2 quarters of no bad news on COVID, industry will be back on track. And it'll take some more time to come up to speed and start sort of hiring again, because even now, with this small recovery that is happening, domestic travel is back to about maybe 50% from flown traffic standpoint. And similarly, maybe hotels, to the pre-pandemic level, but the aviation or the travel and tourism diplomas, etc., they would all get absorbed. But there is going to be short-term disruption, which we should all sort of embrace for.
Okay. I have a question from Sandeepan Bakshi, who's talking about UAE specifically, restricting flight operations from India. So do you have any comments on that? I think there's a lot of people waiting to go there.
No, absolutely. And especially in light of the Expo festival that is, excuse me, that's coming up there. Actually, we were very hopeful, like I mentioned, that we've launched to start with the overall GCC countries, but to start with the focus is UAE. I guess the reason why it's happening is because there was a bit of a surge that happened in the number of cases, and I think it'll change, because at the end of the day, a lot of the people wanting to, a lot of it is at stake for the Expo, and they would be wanting to just open up the country. They're just being, I guess, more careful. Let's hope. I'm hopeful that everybody is sort of at UAE government level, Indian government level, working really hard to see how best can they open it up soon.
Yeah, I think there's been some movement on that front, in the sense that they're allowing those who are going for work related to the Expo to travel. So that's a beginning. Yeah, that's a beginning. Let's hope it opens up further. We have a question from Rotu. He says, as the pandemic has affected the tourism industry badly, so once they open up, both airlines and hotels might hike the tariff.
Yeah.
Do you think that will happen, and what will be the effect on travel?
Yeah, no, I think it's a fair question, and it's a function of various things, because at the end of the day, I think the airlines will have to see it from the point of view of how much capacity is out there, and how much, in terms of load factors. Because the reality today, as I'm sure Tara can tell you or Alok can tell you more, the reality today is that despite the fact that there is only up to 65% capacity allowed, but effectively flowing only about 55%, the load factors are relatively low. And when the load factors are low, then yield management from their point of view becomes very difficult. So I think it's going to be a tightrope of balancing it between the yield management as well as looking at the demand factors. and looking at the load factors, the yield management and the demand. And demand is a function of, prices going up and down. So it is going to be a pretty tight management. I can really imagine that it's going to be um, a pretty severe challenge for all the airlines partners for them to be able to do it. From our point of view, what we end up doing all the time, working very closely with the partners, is to keep giving them a sense of the demand, given the amount of data that we have, the people or the traffic that come on our platform, route by route, literally, and then that is used as an intelligent input, if you will, for people to be able to just take a call on the pricing. So we'll keep providing that sort of very valuable input to the partners, and based on that, and then they will have to see their own cost structures, etc., for them to be able to price the product. But it is going to be a little bit of challenging. I mean, I don't really see immediately that happening, because right now demand is going to be slow and gradual up. Once it sort of improves, then it could be a different story. But let's see how it goes.
Yeah, sure. It's
Tara, if I
demand and
can just
supply.
jump in
Sure,
here.
sure. Please do, Alok.
Sorry. Rajesh, though you mentioned briefly in your remarks, like any other company and like many airlines, we are also taking a very hard look at our business in the context of the post-pandemic demand and the post-pandemic world. So one is looking at diversifying across routes and across market segments. And given the fact that you have so much, knowledge and insight on the India outbound, what could be some of the learnings? What could be some of the pointers for us in terms of where to go? What are the origins? What is the profile? Could you share
No,
some of that?
no, absolutely, and a lot more from the pre-pandemic times than during pandemic, given the international travel was very badly hit. I was sort of giving very small examples. During pandemic, only two countries they did really well from a bubble perspective, was Maldives and Dubai, to an extent, and everybody else was very restricted travel, as we know, only essential, no tourist visas were allowed, etc. But I'll tell you, from pre-pandemic, see, our uh, data tells us is that there is huge amount of demand for Southeast Asia, all countries put together. Specifically, Thailand, of course, leads the pack, but then it's also Indonesia, and Maldives has been actually a hidden gem, and growing at a very high growth rate. So Thailand, Indonesia, Maldives, Singapore, Hong Kong. And Singapore is an expensive destination, and all kinds of travel. But Singapore, Hong Kong is a good combination. Depending upon the consumer segment they look at. And then on the other side, there is Middle East. And within Middle East, it's basically Dubai and Abu Dhabi. And then for Indians, interesting destination, I don't think that'll be a surprise, is also Mauritius. Just from a maybe value for money beach location, kind of kind of. But the other interesting thing, Alok, is also that within Thailand, the emerging trends have been not necessarily just Bangkok, right? Just not necessarily only going to one particular city, or Phuket for that matter. Sorry, not Phuket, but Pattaya for that matter. That becomes like a very regular sort of a thing. But in front of our own eyes, I think we can take maybe some credit for this. We actually developed Phuket as a new destination for Indians as well. Phuket was not known, and and sorry, and the flight connections were poor, because there was no real direct flight. Even now, there was no real direct flight, and we were pushing. And we ended up doing few charters, etc. Early days to promote the destination as well. And as people started going, then people started to discover Thailand beyond, Bangkok and Pattaya, if you will. right? So, and similarly, Bali turned out to be another big sort of attractive destination as well. So I would say 5 hour, 6 hour flying distance is the first port of call for a lot of the Indians. Heavy amount of traffic, again, budget, mid, premium segment, all kinds, family segment, all kinds of segments. And then the next sort of upgradation to this happens to London and Europe before people start thinking about long haul, like US and Australia and New Zealand and so on, right? So and the other interesting trend that we also saw, that there is now maxim for little offbeat destinations, not necessarily going in from where everybody is going, right? There will be masses who would be going, and then there will be a fancy for, can we just look for maybe a secluded destination, maybe a newer destination that could they would want to explore. So whether it was Turkey for that matter, or Istanbul particularly, or others. So that's the sort of trend. The overall good news was that the outbound per se on our platform, given the penetration is also low from an online penetration standpoint relatively to domestic travel, was growing at 40% year on year pre-pandemic. So it was a good indication that maybe what's happening, actually two things. At that point in time, I used to say, one, sometimes domestic travel infrastructure is a constraint, and therefore experience is not that great at times, and we've got one beach location as Goa. But the other more fundamental economic reason is that disposable income was growing, and the behavior was changing to more and more spending than saving, especially the youngsters. The first time getting a job, or you have, let's say, 3, 4, 5 years experience in the new age IT industries. Most of the engineers and all of that, they're just very, very sort of open to venture out and travel and explore international destinations. So, these are the kind of trends that we were picking up. And therefore, I definitely believe that international travel would be probably the last to come up to speed because of so many variables. We still need to, thanks to the COVID protocols. But once it is back and it stabilizes, it's going to be the same sort of demand which used to be there. So that's the way.
Okay. So our CFO had a question which was about some advice on new routes, which I think Alok already asked. So Ranjita, your question is answered. We have a question from one of our route managers, Sarvesh Soni. He says, with relation to business travel, there has been upgrades in technology used by MakeMyTrip. How can Air India Express tap on it?
Sorry, come again, Tara. On which platform you said?
So business travel. He's saying that MakeMyTrip has made some technology upgradation with respect to business travel. So is there any leverage that Air India Express can use with MakeMyTrip?
Of course, by all means, absolutely. And let's take it offline, and I'll make the right connections. But we would love to come up with our thoughts, and then and maybe collaborate with you and figure out opportunity areas. I can tell you the platform is growing. Like I mentioned earlier, just to give you a little bit more color. So we've got a corporate booking platform called MyBiz, which is catering to small and medium business enterprises, all sorts of domestic as well as international travel. And then there is a Quest to Travel platform, which is catering to large corporates, like really, really large, like Aditya Birla Group would be one of the, or IOCL would be one of the customers there. And we have flight product, we've got hotels product, we've got just cab product. So we're trying to make it comprehensive corporate solution, and very just from travelers booking standpoint or booking experience standpoint, very, very close to B2C flow, which is very convenient and very smooth for anyone to use, very easy for anyone to use. And we are adding more and more features to make it easier for the corporate clients. So let's
Sure.
Tara,
No. Yeah, I can hear you, Rajesh, but I don't know the screen. The videos seem to have disappeared for some reason. Can you hear me?
no, I can hear you. I'm actually hearing background noise. I mean, somebody else talking.
Oh, that's strange. May I request those who are not talking to please mute your mics? Okay, I don't know, my videos seem to have disappeared, but I have another question from Subhash Basu. He says, going forward, can you hear? Or are we
Yeah, I can hear you,
disconnected?
Tara.
Okay,
No, I can hear you.
sorry. Okay, going forward, do you think which would be a reliable business model for airlines, legacy or LCC? Any views?
Well, wow. I'm not by any stretch of imagination an aviation expert, but with my limited knowledge on the aviation side per se, I think one thing I can say with a lot of maybe authority, maybe experience that we've had, that both the models, both the products and the models are important, and I think have demand in the market. I think it's important to size the market for a particular sort of use case, whether it's less about full service carrier versus low cost carrier from a cost perspective. It is more about what would consumers need in a particular market. So India has predominantly become a, sort of low cost carrier product or a low frill product. And but there is definitely customer segments that are looking for better product as well. I mean, call it full service, call it with frills attached. I think the first principle approach is to basically see and size the market and see in the domestic short haul travel standpoint, where the maximum distance in the to fly and sitting in the plane is not going to be more than 2.5 hours, and average might be just an hour and a half. Then what would be the need of the consumers, and therefore accordingly sort of build the product and the business model around it. And the second thing that I would say is that the adoption of technology on in both the cases, in every aspect of the business, is going to be super 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 important for because it actually does give you an edge from a long term standpoint to manage your cost and as well as the overall experience for the customer really well. I mean, it's a really a long-term investment. So if we are able to think more on these two aspects and then build a business model around it, I think it would be a lot more probably beneficial from a long-term standpoint. But like I said upfront, I'm not an aviation expert. I'm sure there are other many cost-specific things, whether it's management cost or distribution cost or various other costs that factors that would come into the picture. But these two important things, just from thinking from first principle standpoint, comes to my mind that would be relevant.
Okay, thank you. We have a question from Shoaib Sheikh. He says, how does the strategy of opening up new arenas, diversification of services, that is, work out in the pandemic situation when our base or existing services are badly hit?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And it is a great opportunity that when this kind of not many things that you can think about proactively. See, one way of just evolving your strategy is to just continuously keep thinking proactively, where do you want to go, including diversification. And sometimes with this kind of an event, it pushes you to think harder that, could there be adjacencies? Could there be ancillaries? Could there be a completely new product or the service that you want to get it? I think it's a perfect sort of opportunity for thinking harder and see if it makes sense. Now, once that need is established, then after that the approach is very copybook to my mind. And there, I don't think we need to take a knee jerk decision on this and saying, listen, we got disrupted, and therefore, guess what? Very quickly get into this small little thing. Just more tactically, more from a short-term standpoint, and you can still do it, but that will only serve the short-term purpose. The way to do that would be, think through what are the options that are there on the table, and then go down the path of just sizing the opportunity first. What would it take to make? What are the resources that are required? Is it going to be complementary to the business, or is it going to be, completely a new area that, do we have the expertise or we don't have the expertise? Do we really need to go out to look for expertise for diversification? And think long term. What would be the long term returns of that? What would be the short term investment to get into this, and what would be the long term returns from that business? I think that is the sort of approach that one needs to take for any new business, and that approach doesn't change whether you are in pandemic or you're not in pandemic. What changes is that that it probably pushes you to think harder, given that the model, the current business might be disrupted. But if it is just a short-term a strategy, more like a tactical one for just for the period till the disaster or till the disruption is over, then it's a completely different approach. Then it is just quick and dirty. Figure out what we need to do. Just channelize the resources which are available already in the system, but not doing anything, and move towards executing that particular one and take the short-term benefit out of it. But if it is not necessarily short-term and tactical, then I think we need to think through before we get into any of the diversification business.
Quite true. In fact, we at Air India Express also sort of did some of that stuff during the lockdown, especially in April when there were no passenger flights. We switched to cargo flights. So that was some sort of, yes, it was
Absolutely.
Yeah, it helped us a great deal.
Absolutely.
There's a question from Prasad Ramakrishnan. Saying, in view of the pandemic, contactless travel, biometric and face recognition might become a necessity soon. How should airlines and aviation industry prepare themselves?
Absolutely. As of yesterday, I would say, and should have been done even before. So, I think airline industry and airports were evolving into using the smartphone technology and try to make it more paperless. And now I think it's time to go one step further to make it even more sort of equipment-less. I mean, so it is either a biometric or more like facial recognition, because even biometric, you will be ending up taking fingerprints, and that could be prone to something. But any of the contactless latest technologies that are available out there, I think we should all start to think about them and start making investments towards it.
Yes, definitely. In fact, we have seen a lot of changes even in the airport. The way we do contactless, web check-in has increased drastically. Yeah, a lot of other issues. Sandeepan has another question. He says, how do you think that our organization, or your thoughts to do our goal or operations in international sectors in the travel industry in the second wave of pandemic? Basically, I think what he's saying is, is there any change that you think we as an airline should make in the second wave or thereafter?
Yeah, I mean, you see, again, I think some of these things you guys might be much more closer to the airlines business model than I am. But what comes to my mind again is two things actually. See, we shouldn't underestimate, or you all shouldn't underestimate, the Air India brand power that exists. I think it's probably the most powerful, sort of asset that is already there for many years, because it's an iconic brand and it could be leveraged. And I think the second most important part I keep going back to, and it's equally true for MakeMyTrip or GoIBIBO or Redbus for that matter, is that what is that product that I have in front of me that I'm offering it to the customers. I mean, what's really the experience that I'm providing? Ultimately the brands would continue to be, um, liked or loved on the back of the product experience. I mean, it can't just be just simply doing marketing and then people start to liking and loving the brands. It doesn't happen. I think it's just the um, finesse and the attention to detail of the actual in-flight experience or the overall experience that you would end up providing. If we are able to bring the focus there more and more, and again, there are tools available to build or make improvements on a continuous basis. Effectively, to just always stay in touch with your customers and keep collecting the feedback and a genuine feedback, and they would tell you. I mean, I kid you not, the amount of feedback that we end up getting, and we get ideas on what our customers do feel that they are happy about and do feel they are not happy about. One, and two, they come up with their own suggestions of what could be improved. Or for that matter, whenever we end up launching a particular feature, we go back to the market and test it out and get the feedback whether they like it or they don't like it, or how they like it to be better, etc. If that becomes more like continuous rhythm in the company, I think it will be one of the key success factors for any product, definitely Air India Express as well, for them to be able to make a differentiation in the international market. I mean, if you see post second wave, the kind of tweaks and the changes that you will have to make will be more, I think, being more selective and choosy, looking at the demand factors and putting your planes accordingly. But in terms of just making a long-term, difference in the market and gaining more market share, and, competing with your competition, I think the differentiation will have to come from the product experience more and more. I don't think pricing is going to play too much of a role, because everyone would be, the pricing structures by and large are supposed to be the same. I don't think it wins you the game eventually. I think what wins you the game is just the customer service and the experience at the end of the day.
Yes, definitely, Rajesh. I know we're running short of time, but just one last question. Make My Trip has done some fantastic campaigns, advertising campaigns. I remember your memories one. Make Your Memories one. So, any views on marketing and advertising that airlines should follow? Any advice?
No, absolutely happy to share that. I mean, the latest one, by the way, is the vaccination campaign, Make a Vaccination Trip, which we sort of launched very recently. It was more on the digital media. Um, I think a couple of things that comes to my mind. When it comes to modern days of or modern era of advertising, what has become super important and super critical is not necessarily the conventional and the traditional channels or mediums of communication, which is and which is effectively, let's say, offline papers or TV for that matter. We know that the market is evolving into the OTT platforms massively. The market is evolving into the digital platforms massively. The social media platforms, the viral marketing on, let's say, in a surrogate sort of way on even WhatsApp and so on. So the first important one to keep in mind would be that, do you have a strategy in place to roll out your communication or the marketing campaign on the digital assets that are available out there? Because the reach for those digital assets and the effectiveness is far, far greater now what it used to be some time back, right? So that, I think, is super critical now. And this is not necessarily from a the communication channel standpoint, but also just for your overall sort of being present in all the digital platforms from a performance marketing standpoint. So do we actually have those expertise in the house? I mean, not necessarily if we don't have the expertise in the house, there are plenty of expertise available outside in the market. But, it's very important to have for a CMO of Air India Express to have that strategy in place, knowledge and strategy in place. And then the second one I would say is that again, when we at least, the principle that we have followed historically to get the campaigns right, again, listening to the customers and seeing what is that we need to reinforce and what is that we need to reiterate. So it could be a function of that I have come up with a completely new product, revamped product, and therefore I need to communicate that, which means that I'm pegging on the innovation peg. But there could also be a situation where the need of the hour and maybe the pain area is a specific sort of area, and we have built some features on top of it, and therefore I can just focus on that feature and communicate that very, very effectively. And then you got to be maybe overall sort of consistently true and honest to what your products are and what your experience are, not necessarily being completely over the top and making promises which you can't deliver. So these are few principles I think that works beautifully in the marketing strategy that might be helpful to you.
Okay, thanks, Rajesh. It was a very interesting and insightful session. I'm sure everybody here has enjoyed it. End the session now. We have actually overrun by a few minutes, but I'm sure that's okay. Thanks again. Thanks a lot, Rajesh.
Thank you. Thank you, Tara. Thank you, Alok. Thank you, Pagesh.